The Enfield poltergeist was rooted in a quiet London council house, a place so ordinary it almost felt invisible. In 1977, families on Green Street lived simple lives: work, school, supper, sleep. Nothing dramatic, nothing supernatural. But inside the Hodgson home, something began to stir. Something that would twist that small, cramped house into one of the most documented hauntings in history. Peggy Hodgson was a single mother raising 4 children: Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy. She stretched every pound, patched every school uniform, and fought through every day with the exhaustion of a woman who had no help and no time to complain. The children shared rooms, shared beds, shared fears. They were close. They had to be. Life didn't give them much else. The trouble began in the late summer, when nights stayed warm, but the air inside the house felt strangely cold. It started quietly: faint taps on the walls, soft knocks from inside the furniture, a gentle rattling beneath the floorboards. The children complained first. They said something moved at night. They said someone whispered in the hallway. But mothers hear 1,000 false alarms in their lifetime. Peggy brushed it off as imagination. The knocking grew louder, more deliberate. Not random thumps, but patterns, rhythms, like responses. One night, the girls screamed from upstairs. Peggy rushed up expecting a fight, but what she saw froze her. A heavy chest of drawers slid away from the wall on its own. Not violently, not suddenly. Just a steady, forceful push, as if invisible hands were shoving it. Peggy cursed under her breath and shoved it back. It resisted. She felt pressure pushing from the other side. Then it stopped. The room fell silent, except for the children breathing fast, eyes wide, faces pale. That was the moment she realized this was not imagination. Something was inside the house. The next night, the knocks came again, louder, sharper, echoing through the walls like fists slamming wood. The children couldn't sleep. Peggy dragged them to the neighbor's house in the middle of the night. Desperate, embarrassed, terrified. She begged the neighbors to listen. They did. They heard the knocks too. They searched the house top to bottom, attic, cupboards, behind the pipes. Nothing. No explanation. But the knocking continued behind them, almost as if following. A police constable was called. She arrived expecting a domestic disturbance, maybe a frightened mother, maybe troubled kids. What she didn't expect was the chair. While she interviewed the family in the living room, a wooden chair slid across the floor. Slow, clean, impossible. She inspected it. No wires, no tricks, no children near it. She later filed a statement saying exactly what she saw. It made no sense, but she knew it wasn't fraud. Reporters came next. They expected a joke, a publicity stunt, but it was chaos inside the house. Furniture shifted. Toys flew. The girls cried without reason. A Lego brick shot across the room and hit a photographer in the eye. His skin bruised instantly, and soon after Janet changed. She was 11 years old, playful, stubborn, loud at times, sensitive at others. But in the weeks following the disturbances, she grew distant. She sleepwalked into the hallway. She talked in her sleep. She woke in positions no child should twist into. She said she felt someone watching her. She said she heard breathing behind her, even when she was alone. One night, she told Margaret she felt hands grabbing her in the dark. Then came the voice. Not a child's voice, not even a person's voice. A low, rumbling growl rising from deep in her throat. Words forming in a tone that sounded rotten, ancient, broken. Investigators couldn't explain it. Doctors couldn't replicate it. And Janet herself said she didn't remember speaking. What hid in that house wasn't shy anymore. It wanted to be heard. And soon, it wanted more. By the autumn of 1977, the disturbances escalated. The knocks had evolved into bangs. Doors slammed without touch. Objects lifted and fell, sometimes across rooms, leaving dents in walls and scratches in the floor. Janet's voice changed with every episode. Some nights, she whispered words no one understood. Other nights, she roared curses that made the adults flinch. The household was no longer just tense, it was unbearable. Peggy tried to maintain control. She called neighbors for help. She documented everything in notebooks, scribbling frantic details whenever an object moved or a voice spoke. She photographed the rooms before and after incidents, hoping for proof, hoping for understanding. Margaret and the boys did their best to stay out of the way, but even they weren't immune. Johnny said he saw chairs rise above the floor, hovering before slamming down. Billy cried when his toys floated across the room, rattling shelves. No one slept. The house had become a battlefield. The children's school life began to suffer. Janet withdrew from friends, avoiding conversations, eyes darting as if expecting something to follow her. She complained of headaches and stomach aches, sometimes fainting in class. Teachers noticed a strange pallor and nervous twitching. It seemed beyond normal childhood stress. Yet at home, the phenomena worsened. It was as if the presence fed off fear, growing stronger as Janet and her family's desperation deepened. Psychologists and doctors were consulted. Skeptics suggested it was hysteria, exaggeration, or attention-seeking behavior. But no medical explanation accounted for the objects flying, the furniture moving, or the guttural voices that seemed to come from Janet herself. One psychiatrist attempted hypnosis, hoping to unlock suppressed memories or fears. Janet, in a trance, described a shadowy figure that appeared at the foot of her bed, smiling cruelly. She said it whispered secrets, threatened her, and sometimes laughed. The doctor left shaken, unable to explain the physical manifestations that followed these sessions. By December, the phenomenon expanded. Peggy recalled waking to a noise in the kitchen, heavy footsteps pacing. She entered to find the table rocking violently. A bread knife slid across the counter toward her. She jumped back, screaming. Margaret's bedroom door slammed repeatedly when she tried to go upstairs. Neighbors began refusing to approach, whispering about curses, ghosts, and dark magic. The council received anonymous calls, some warning that the house was tainted. Investigators from the Society for Psychical Research arrived. Morris Gross and Guyline Playfair were the most prominent. They recorded hours of activity. Chairs lifting without contact, beds shaking, voices emerging from thin air, objects thrown across rooms with unerring accuracy. But it was Janet's own body that drew their attention most. Sometimes, her face would contort as if someone else was inhabiting it. Her voice would drop several octaves, speaking in a harsh, unfamiliar tone. She would curse, insult, and laugh in ways that seemed impossible for an 11-year-old. Yet when calm returned, she had no memory of the episodes. The middle of January brought a turning point. Janet told her mother that the entity had come inside her. It was not a dream. It was not imagination. She described a creeping cold, a sense of being watched even in the warmth of daylight. She said it gripped her chest at night, making it impossible to breathe, forcing words from her lips she did not intend. She insisted that it wanted her, that it thrived on fear, that it was patient and clever. Peggy felt horror unlike anything she had known. Her daughter was the epicenter, the conduit through which chaos poured. Gross and Playfair documented every detail meticulously. They recorded Janet speaking in strange dialects, sometimes quoting passages she had never learned. Furniture moved when cameras were rolling, proving that the events weren't mere pranks. One constable returned to confirm his previous statement. Chairs and tables did indeed move. The more proof accumulated, the more impossible the case became to deny. The house had become a laboratory of fear, a stage where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Janet began to feel exhaustion unlike any normal child would. Sleep became a battleground. At night, she would thrash, growl, scream in guttural voices, and sometimes speak in her own terrified tone. Her voice, her body, Even her expressions were not entirely her own. Sometimes she barked like an animal. Other times she wept in languages she did not know. Margaret tried comforting her, but Janet would recoil, screaming, "Don't touch me. It's inside me." And the object attacks continued. Doors slammed so hard they splintered. Chairs flew across rooms with impossible force. Toys and books were hurled as if aiming for targets. The family's furniture was ruined, walls marked with scratches, floors dented. But the entity was never destructive for the sake of destruction. It seemed to want attention, recognition, proof that it existed. It was in the dead of night that Janet fully articulated what the investigators feared. She whispered to Peggy, "It's me and not me. I can't stop it. It will not leave." For the first time, Peggy understood. This was not a haunting in the traditional sense. This was possession. This was a child under siege by something ancient, calculating, and relentless. By February, the possession had grown undeniable. Janet's body no longer belonged entirely to her. During the day, she could be sweet, timid, and frightened. But at night, she became a vessel for something far older and darker. It was not simply movement or noise anymore. It was control. She spoke in voices that were older than her, rasping, commanding, and cruel. The investigators recorded over 40 different instances in which Janet's voice would shift in pitch, tone, and even accent, sometimes within the same sentence. Sometimes she spoke in a guttural, growling English, sometimes in fractured, ancient-sounding German. Janet herself could not explain it. She admitted to her mother, "I hear it. It's talking in my head. It makes me say things. I try to fight it. I try to stop, but it's stronger. It knows my fear," the house responded. Chairs would tip at her command or what seemed like her command, but no one touched them. Doors would slam. Toys would fly. Footsteps paced above ceilings, yet no one walked. The family's sleep was impossible, their nerves frayed to the breaking point. The investigators stayed longer, observing, recording, cataloging every incident. Ross brought audio equipment. Playfair videotaped. They wanted proof, undeniable evidence. And it came. On one tape, Janet's head twisted unnaturally. Her voice changed mid-phrase, becoming guttural and mocking. A bed shook violently, the mattress rising and falling as if it had lungs. In another recording, a heavy chair slid across the floor with Janet seated inches away, her hands on her lap, untouched. These events were no hoax. They were meticulous, intelligent, deliberate. It was during these sessions that the possession revealed its method. Janet explained that the entity had come to her slowly. It had watched, waited, tested her. It entered during moments of vulnerability, at night, when she slept, during fear, when she felt helpless. It whispered promises and threats, words she could not repeat aloud. Over weeks, it expanded its control, learning her patterns, exploiting her fears. Janet described a cold sensation creeping up her arms, a pressure in her chest, a tightening around her throat. "It's like I'm frozen," she said. "I try to scream, but the sound isn't mine." The entity thrived on fear. The investigators noticed it would act only when emotions were heightened. If Janet was laughing or calm, the house remained still. If she panicked, even slightly, objects would obey the invisible force, responding as if reading her terror. It was intelligent, manipulative, and terrifyingly precise. The poltergeist wasn't random, it was strategic. The family was desperate. Peggy spent hours coaxing Janet, trying to soothe her, trying to remind her daughter that this was not her fault. Margaret took a protective role, holding her sister, whispering prayers into her ears. The boys learned to avoid the rooms where incidents occurred, hiding in corners while objects rattled and furniture danced. Yet Janet bore the brunt. Her body ached, her mind fractured. She stopped eating consistently, complained of fatigue, and her laughter turned hollow. tinged with something that did not belong to a child. By March, the phenomena escalated further. It was no longer contained to Janet's presence alone. Other rooms experienced disturbances even when she slept elsewhere. Objects would move toward her or away, responding to her mere thought. Investigators theorized that Janet had become a focal point, a conduit through which the poltergeist could act, but no longer its only center. The house itself seemed to pulse with energy, responding to fear and tension, amplifying the possession into something almost alive. Neighbors began reporting strange sounds outside the house. Footsteps pacing hallways at night, knocks on walls, voices calling their names. Some claimed to see shadows moving behind curtained windows. The local community grew wary. Gossip spread, and soon reporters and skeptics arrived, cameras in hand, skeptical smiles in place. But within minutes, the house shattered their disbelief. Chairs flew, beds shook, objects hurled themselves across rooms. One journalist's camera tripod toppled, narrowly missing his foot. Every incident confirmed. The Enfield poltergeist was real, and it was unpredictable. Janet's own body became a theater of terror. She would contort into impossible positions, crawl along ceilings, and speak in voices that were foreign and aggressive. She would reveal knowledge she could not have known, details of the house's past occupants, secrets never told aloud. Investigators were astonished. The energy surrounding her wasn't merely poltergeist activity. It felt sentient, aware, and deeply connected to her fear and vulnerability. And yet, for all the chaos, Janet remained remarkably conscious of her own torment. She would plead in her voice, sometimes in her own tone, sometimes through the guttural entity. "Please, stop. I can't take it." Her insight into the possession horrified the investigators. They were observing not just random acts of mischief, but the slow, methodical torment of a child trapped within her own body by something utterly alien. By April, the Enfield poltergeist had reached a level of intensity that defied belief. The house vibrated with presence, heavy and malevolent. Nights were the worst. Peggy slept with one eye open, listening to walls creak and floors groan. Margaret and the boys avoided the living room entirely, fearing that even stepping foot there might provoke another outburst. Janet, trapped in her own body, bore the weight of the entity's wrath. She trembled constantly, sometimes whispering prayers under her breath, sometimes screaming curses that were not hers. Investigators stayed for hours at a time. They watched, they recorded, they measured, but no explanation sufficed. Every night brought new horrors. Beds would leap from the floor, slamming against walls. Doors swung open violently, even when locked. A record player spun at impossible speeds, sending shards of vinyl scattering across the carpet. And through it all, Janet's voice would rise and fall, sometimes pleading, sometimes commanding, sometimes taunting. She became a stage for something larger than herself, a conduit for forces beyond comprehension. One night, a police officer returned to document the activity. He witnessed a full-scale demonstration of power. A small table levitated above the floor, tilting precariously, then dropped with such force it splintered. Janet lay on her bed, paralyzed with fear, yet the table's movements were tied to her presence. She had not touched it. No one had. Yet the energy seemed to pulse from her, growing stronger with every thump and crash. The officer later described it as something alive, something thinking, something cruel. The possession deepened inside Janet. She spoke in languages she had never learned, reciting phrases in Latin and German, her voice low, guttural, almost alien. Sometimes she cursed her mother, sometimes begged her for help. At times, she barked or laughed with a voice that sounded ancient, terrifyingly aware. It was no longer a child speaking. It was something else entirely. Something that knew the house, knew the family, knew their fears. And it was enjoying it. Peggy, desperate, began to take drastic measures. She would lock doors, pull furniture against walls, and even try to contain Janet during episodes. Nothing worked. The entity responded with more intensity, more creativity. Once, a sofa moved across the room on its own, narrowly missing Peggy. Another time, toys hurled themselves toward the investigators' heads, forcing them to retreat. The house itself seemed to bend to the poltergeist's will, responding not just to Janet's presence, but to the fear and tension of every person inside. Investigators began to notice patterns. The poltergeist was intelligent, almost strategic. It would test the boundaries, escalating until someone intervened, then retreating just enough to keep everyone on edge. It demanded attention, demanded acknowledgement. It thrived on chaos and terror, turning ordinary nights into nightmares. By May, Janet herself began to change. Her once bright eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. She slept sporadically, often waking screaming, her body contorted in ways that seemed impossible. She whispered of a dark presence pressing on her chest, of hands gripping her throat, of voices laughing at her terror. The entity had become an inseparable part of her life, entwining itself with her every thought, every fear. And yet, she retained awareness. She could describe the events afterward, recounting the words spoken through her, the movements made, the terror inflicted. "It wants me," she told her mother. "It needs me to be afraid. It feeds on it. I try to fight, but it's stronger." Her words chilled even the most skeptical of observers. This was not random mischief. This was something ancient, predatory, feeding on fear and innocence. By June, the disturbances were a daily spectacle. Journalists, psychics, priests, and skeptics came and went, documenting the impossible. Chairs slid, doors slammed, beds shook, objects flew. The entity mocked them, taunted them, and challenged them. It spoke through Janet with increasing frequency and volume, sometimes whispering secrets of the past, sometimes screaming threats into the empty house. One particularly harrowing night, investigators witnessed the entity physically manifest in ways that were undeniable. Janet levitated off her bed for a brief moment, her body stiff, suspended in midair. Books flew from shelves, scattering across the floor with precision. A piano in the living room played chords by itself, the notes resonating through the walls. And through it all, Janet's voice shifted continuously, blending her own timid tone with guttural, commanding voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The family's lives were fractured. Peggy could not work regular hours. The children slept little. The house had become a cage, the walls echoing with terror and whispers. The entity had not merely haunted, they had claimed. Eventually, the events slowed. Not because the entity left, but because Janet began to assert some control, some resistance. She learned to anticipate the shifts, to calm herself during attacks, to resist the fear that the entity craved. Furniture still moved, voices still rang, but the episodes became shorter, less violent. Observers noted that as Janet's courage grew, the poltergeist's influence weakened, almost as if it fed solely on fear. In the years that followed, Janet recounted the events, describing the months of terror with haunting clarity. Investigators preserve recordings and testimony, leaving a detailed archive that remains one of the most compelling poltergeist cases in history. The house itself returned to normal, yet the legend persisted. Visitors reported unease, cold spots, fleeting shadows. And Janet, now grown, spoke cautiously of that time, describing a childhood interrupted, a life shaped by a force she could not comprehend, but survived. The Enfield poltergeist left more than fear behind it, left questions. What had truly possessed that house? Was it a spirit? A residual energy? Or something intelligent, malevolent, and patient? No one can say for certain. And perhaps that is the most terrifying part. The entity may still linger, waiting, watching, feeding on fear in ways we will never understand.